So today I've been asked to speak to us about having Christ-centered relationships. So if you're here for the first time, if you haven't been here for this month, we've been looking at our relationship status, and we've been reminding ourselves throughout to focus on Jesus. Been reminding ourselves to flee, like Chikwaza talked to us about. Been reminding ourselves to fix our eyes on Jesus, like Bree and even Jeffro spoke to us about. And Chikwaza and Bree actually put together this sermon series, and they thought it's good for us to look at what it means to focus all our relationships on Jesus. Because there is a connection. There's a connection between not just how I see my romantic relationships, how I see that relationship status. There's a connection between that and how I see the rest of the relationships in my life. And so today we're asking ourselves a couple of questions like, how our relationships with others around us impact our relationships with God? And what does living into God's plan for wholeness in Him look like within all my relationships, romantic and otherwise? And as I've listened to the different messages, I believe that really the reason we're asking these questions is to help us not focus all our hopes, all our dreams, all our desires for a great life on just romance or a partner, whether this partner has revealed themselves or not. That having this person or this thing is not the solution. And as so many have said who've come before me, marriage is not the end goal. Or as I'd like to say it today, love is not what you need. Or not all you need. Who knows the famous song? No. Jeffrey, you're a hip-hop head for sure. I see you. But there's a song called Love Is All You Need by the Beatles. Yeah? Love is not all you need. And today I'd like us to look at someone in the Bible who puts all their hopes and dreams in finding love. All of them. And I want us to see what the result of that was and to distinguish between the things that are part of their story that are not for us, it's just what happened to them, and the things that are definitely for us. Now, this guy I'm about to talk about is called Jacob. I don't know if you know his story, and I even don't want to tell you his story because what we're about to read is wild. It's so good. But I do need to tell you his story so that you can even understand just how wild it is. Okay? So just 5 quick things you need to know about Jacob. Number 1, his grandfather is Abraham. Okay? Grandfather is Abraham, yes. The guy in the Bible who had a baby with his wife when they were old. That Abraham. Okay? The baby's name was Isaac, Jacob's father. And Isaac was the beginning of a promise God had made to Abraham about birthing a nation through him. Not just any nation, but a nation that would show the world who God was. Because since the fall, since Adam and Eve sinned in the garden and left the garden, the Bible makes the claim that people don't know God anymore. So God wants to reveal himself to people through this special nation. And Jacob is an heir of this promise. Now, around the time that Jacob was born, there was a prophecy given by God to Isaac that this Jacob, even though he was the younger brother, in other words, there was someone before him, he would be greater than his older brother. His older brother would serve him. And Jacob and his mother, Rebecca, take this entitlement to a whole new level. It's almost as if the prophecy from God is not enough. They need to do some stuff. So what do? Well, let me just preface this by saying Jacob's name means con man. And that puts a whole new spin on every time in the Bible God says he's the father of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or the God of the con man. Okay? Don't take that out of context. Now, first, for his desire for wealth, fortune, and goodwill, Jacob sells a bowl of lentils to his brother Esau in exchange for his birthright. See, in Jewish culture, they had these beliefs that certain blessings spoken at a certain time to a certain person were foundational and their destiny. And one of these blessings was the birthright. And so one day Esau comes home, the older brother, he's hungry, and finds Jacob cooking a bowl of lentils, which maybe in that day was exciting, but today I'm like, green grams, dengu. I don't know. And Esau wants the bowl. Jacob sells him the bowl. Crazy that Jacob makes the offer in the first place. Crazier that his brother accepts it. But again, he's the con man. And Esau sells his birthright for a bowl of dengu. Secondly, when Isaac wants to give his sons the final blessing, so he's getting old, in fact, his eyes are starting to fail him, and he calls in his sons, Rebekah and Jacob decide to trick Isaac. And the way they trick him it's not flattering for Esau, because they basically put goat skin on him and say that Esau feels like goat skin. So Isaac can't see his son, but feels the goat skin and thinks, oh, it's Esau. I don't know if that's flattering. But anyway, Isaac is tricked and he blesses Jacob as if Jacob was Esau. And this thing angers Esau. And it causes division in their household. So great that Esau just lives the rest of most of his life. And that's not English. Most of the rest of his life, at least while he's in his father's household, he lives it with one thing in mind. He wants to kill Jacob. Now, Rebekah and Isaac, fearing for their son's life, they send him away to Rebekah's brother, a guy called Laban, who we will see is conman extraordinaire. And they believe that Jacob will be safe with Rebekah's brother till Esau's anger subsides. But little do they all know that this is the last time that Jacob will ever see his parents alive. He'll never see them again because of this con. And then finally, number 5, Jacob is running. He's on the run, he's afraid, he realizes the gravity of what he's done. And as he's running, he gets to this place where he can't run anymore, he's exhausted. He sleeps in open country, he lays his head down on a rock. And as he's sleeping, he has a vision of a ladder leading up to heaven and angels coming down and going up. And he wakes up and interprets this as, oh, actually God is protecting me, because Jacob really doesn't have a sense of God. He's the heir of a great promise from this God, but he really doesn't have a sense of who this God is. And he sees this vision and realizes, oh, God is taking care of me. So he wakes up and he makes a great promise. He says, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I am going, and will give me bread to eat because he's hungry, and clothing to wear because he doesn't know if he'll make it, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. Which means what? Jacob isn't serving God currently. I don't know how many times I find people shocked at the idea that the guys in the Bible who God calls, like he had to call, none of them are born actually serving him. None of them are consistent, maybe 1 or 2, but the majority are not. And I don't know why people strike themselves off the list of God using me based on what you've done or the orientation of your heart. Because when you read stories like Jacob, you realize there actually really is nothing that matters except the fact that he's called me. Jacob says, he'll be my God. And this stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house. And and of all that you give me, I will give a tenth to you. So some of you wonder where we get tithes from. This is one of the verses as well. He says a tenth on his own. Why does he feel the need to give God a tenth? That's for another day, but it exists. And then Jacob names the stone and the place of the stone Bethel. Beth meaning house, El of God. And that would become the name of many churches, many ministries, and many children since. Now, to know all these things about Jacob, let's actually read this wild story, because if it's not wild enough, it's about to get wilder. Okay? Genesis 29, and we're reading the whole thing because it's that good. Okay? If you have a Bible, you can turn to it. I don't know if it'll come up on the screen, but if not, just follow along with my voice. So then Jacob continued, and I read from the NIV, on his journey and came to the land of the eastern people. There he saw a well in open country with 3 flocks of sheep lying near it because the flocks were watered from the well. The stone over the mouth of the well was large. Take note. When all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone away from the well's mouth and water the sheep. Then they would return the stone to its place over the mouth of the well. Jacob asked the shepherds, "My brothers, where are you from?" "We're from Haran," they replied. He said to them, "Do you know Laban, Nahor's grandson?" "Yes, we know him," they answered. Then Jacob asked them, "Is this his well?" Now, they respond, "Yes." But this is important because Jacob's dad, Isaac, found Rebekah. Well, Jacob's dad, Isaac's servant, found Rebekah at this well. This is where his mom was found. So yes, he is, they said. And here comes his daughter, Laban's daughter, Rachel, with the sheep. "Look," he said, "the sun is still high. It is not time for the flocks to be gathered. Water the sheep and take them back to the pasture." "We can't," they replied, "until all the flocks are gathered and the stone has been rolled away from the mouth of the well." Then we will water the sheep. While he was still talking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep. It was common for women to be shepherds in those days, for she was a shepherd. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of his uncle Laban, and Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. Now, contrary to what you might think, this is not romantic. He is kissing her because he's trying to identify himself as family and friend. You can't use that as an excuse going forward. He had told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and a son of Rebekah, who's Laban's sister. So she ran and told her father, "Hey, your nephew is here." As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he hurried to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his home. And there Jacob told him all these things. Then Laban said to him, "You are my own flesh and blood." So far, so good. Nothing too wild. Let the wildness begin. After Jacob had stayed with him for a whole month, Laban said to him, "Just because you are a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be." Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes. We really don't know what that means. But Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. I think this is one of the first times the Bible talks about a lovely figure. Okay? And it's there for a reason. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, "I will work for 7 years in return for your younger daughter, Rachel." Somebody say this with me. 7 years is wild. Even for those days. Oh, okay, you didn't have to say that part, but thank you. Laban said, "It is better that I give her to you than to some other man." He doesn't say yes. Huh? "Stay here with me." So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Somebody say this with me. Only a few days is wild. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife. My time is completed and I want to make love to her." Yes, that's the Bible. I did not misquote it. He said that. This is NIV. In the English Standard Version, I'm so sorry, but really, we are adults. It says, "I want to go into her." That's what it says. And that's what it means in Hebrew. Now, please, somebody say this with me. Saying that to your future father-in-law is wild. Even today. All right, conman. It's about to go the other direction for him. Eh? So where are we? "And I want to make love to her," verse 21. Verse 22. So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. Interesting reaction to what he's been told. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob. And Jacob made love to her. That's also wild, but we'll come back to it. And Laban gave his servant Zilpah to his daughter as her attendant. When morning came, there was Leah! Exclamation mark. Somebody say this with me. Wild. So Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? I have served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" And the extraordinary conman replies, "It's not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this daughter's bridal week, then we will give you the younger one also in return for another 7 years of work." And Jacob did so. He finished the week with Leah, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her attendant. Jacob made love to Rachel also. I think the narrator had to make sure that was there, okay? And his love for Rachel was greater than his love for Leah, and he worked for Laban another 7 years. Now, story continues. When the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he enabled her to conceive, but Rachel remained childless. Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben, for she said, "It is because the Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now." Somebody say that name is wild. She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, "Because the Lord heard that I am not loved, he gave me this one too." So she named him Simeon. That name is wild. Again she conceived, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, "Now at last my husband will become attached to me because I have borne him 3 sons." So he was named Levi, and that name is wild. Final verse of the chapter. She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, "This time I will praise the Lord." So she named her son Judah. Then she stopped having children till somewhere in the next chapter where she has 2 more. Okay? Now let's process this story a little bit. Number 1, the conman got conned. Those of you who love poetic justice are like me. You're like, take that, you 3-card Monty playing. We're in church, you know? Jacob, how do you con your brother out of his birthright? With green grams. Yeah? You deserve everything you get in this story, but does he really? There's so many people affected in this story by what he does. Let's start with Laban. Despite him being conman extraordinaire, he's shocked by his nephew's actions. He welcomes his nephew. After the month is gone, he knows the story. You conned your brother, that's why you're here. That's why my sister sent you to me. So what do you think was Laban's response to his nephews? "Give me my wife that I may go into her, for my time is completed." He's shocked. "Nephew, why would you say that?" Look at Leah. Leah becomes collateral damage until she chooses not to be. Maybe she's not hopeful for love because, as the passage says, there's something with her eyes. But then she gets Jacob for a week. Most people miss that part of the story. You realize Jacob finishes a week with Leah and then gets married to Rachel. That's what the story says. He works off the 7 years after getting married to Rachel. Leah doesn't have him for 7 years. She has him for a week. And even after that, if you read verse 27 and verse 28 in Hebrew, it's nice in the NIV, it's nice in the ESV, but in the actual Hebrew, it doesn't say that he loves Rachel more. The word it uses for Leah is hate. Jacob hates her. That's what it says in Hebrew. And again, we're adults. He hates her, but he does not stop sleeping with her. That's crazy. Leah's children, because, alas, their names are proof of their father's lack of love for their mother and his future preference for Rachel's children. And that future preference will get one of Rachel's children in a lot of trouble with his siblings. And then Rachel. Now, she's at odds with her sister for life over a man. You know, every time I read about Jacob, I need to humble myself because I go really hard on him, but I remember in some ways I am like Jacob, if I'm honest. And I can see how upsetting this is, but Rachel and Leah were just chilling. And now they're at odds for the rest of their life. We don't know of any friction beforehand between them. We can imagine some jealousy, but really it's not spoken of. We're imagining it. But if you read the very next chapter, chapter 30, you will see them fight. A detailed account of envy and manipulation involving their children. And it goes on for a while. Now go read it on your own. I'm not going to read it for you. Give up your true crime for a night or whatever you watch. Indulge in this. The Bible is actually very interesting. But all these people, their lives get so fundamentally changed by what Jacob does. So why does Jacob do this? There's a lot happening here, guys, and I hope you didn't miss it as I talked about it. Does anyone see broken telephone here? Nobody sees it? Who sees it? 1 or 2 people see it. Let's confirm if you have it. Most of you don't. Let me explain. So the first thing I need to explain is that this message that I'm giving you is not really mine. It belongs to somebody else. A wonderful wise man called Timothy Keller. And he wrote a beautiful book called Counterfeit Gods. The empty promises of money, sex, and power, and the only hope that matters. Timothy Keller died this year, but his work has touched so many. And in this book, there's a chapter called Love is Not All You Need. And I want you to hear his commentary on a Berkeley professor who talks about why Jacob does what he does, because Jacob does some wild stuff here, isn't it? And just as a caveat, if you've been as wild as Jacob, this is no judgment. In fact, we're all Jacobs here, as we'll soon see. So the Berkeley professor is called Robert Alter, and he says, why does Jacob do this? Jacob's life was empty. He never had his father's love. He had lost his beloved mother's love. And he certainly had no sense of God's love and care. Then he beheld the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, and he must have said to himself, if I had her, finally, something would be right in my miserable life. If I had her, it would fix things. All the longings of his heart for meaning and affirmation were fixed on Rachel. That's why 7 years doesn't seem like too much. Seems like a few days. And 7 more years is fine. He accepts without complaining. See, there's broken telephone. There's a mangled, distorted sense of love that Jacob has received from his parents. And he has passed that on with his pain to his children. And in a sense, we are all like that. We all have received some weird form of love, and we've all pinned our hopes on love to save us. And we bring that into our desires for our relationships. We bring that into what we expect from everyone around us. Father, mother, sister, brother, friend, sometimes even acquaintances, romantic partners. We bring all of that with us. And in fact, to read Keller again, page 29, and you really should get a copy of this book and read it. He says, he's quoting somebody else, but he says, the popular music and art of our time calls us to keep on doing it, to load all of the deepest needs of our hearts for significance and transcendence into romance and love. You're nobody till somebody loves you, goes the popular song. Love is all you need, goes the popular song. And we are an entire culture that's taken that literally. We maintain the fantasy that if we find our one true soulmate, everything wrong with us will be healed. But when our expectations and hopes reach that magnitude, as Becca says, Becca is the person he's quoting, the love object is God. No lover, no human being is qualified for that role. No one can live up to that. The inevitable result is bitter disillusionment. Now, the book is nicer than this particular passage, but I think it brings the point home. We have made love the biggest thing. And I think we do it in subtle ways, even in the church, and I want to show this to you. So if you can have that slide on the screen. How people say God is love? Yeah? I'm sure some of you have this written in your journal. God is love, this, from a time when you really felt like either someone was mistreating you or you needed to be reminded of God's love. And there's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing wrong with this at all. But I do think we need to question, what do we mean? We need to question, what do we mean? And I think sometimes this is what we mean. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. We mean that God is less than or equal to love. And love is greater than or equal to God. In other words, there's a higher thing than God called love, and God must follow it. And love defines God instead of God defining love. The most God can ever be to you is loving, and if he is not, then he is not God. And I think we use this to define our lives in so many different ways. We define our identities, our preferences according to this statement. And it's the reason why, despite all the drama people have with church today, we can all agree God is love, but we're not saying the same thing. See, the claim the Bible will make is that God defines love. That there's this type of love that God gives that is not necessarily going to take away the other loves, but is going to make it such that you don't need them because you're satisfied in him. I need to be adult with you guys again and give you this example. It's crazy for me to suggest that you take all of your romantic and physical needs to God because he's not going to fulfill them. God is not interested in having sex with you. And I think sometimes when we say it in Christian circles, we're trying to say it's a one-to-one. It's not. In fact, if you didn't think the Bible was wild enough, there's a story here about angels who decided to have sex with humans, and God wasn't happy about it. But what God is saying is, sex isn't bad, I gave you that desire. And wanting sex isn't bad, I gave you that desire. But I'm offering you a love that can cover for that, so that you can want it without needing it. Some of you are like, it's not for sex, it's for companionship. Let's go there as well. telling you that God will fulfill all your needs for companionship with some other human being is just a lie. That's not true. He created those desires, but he never intended for them to be needs. And the love that God is offering you is a love that will cover that and say you can want it because it's not wrong. I made it. It's primal. It's baked into you. It is good, but you're never supposed to need it. And I will love you so you don't need it. And you know what happens when you don't need it, but you want it? Is you can live without it. And you can also live with it. Jesus says this in a very interesting way. He says this in Luke 14:26, and people don't usually understand what he meant, but he was trying to bring this point home to his disciples. He says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Jesus wasn't saying throw stones at them, throw your hands at them, give them words. He wasn't saying forsake them. All he was saying is all the love that you desire from these people has to be secondary to me. Otherwise, this thing doesn't work. And I put it to you guys that some of us have tried this thing with God and this thing with Jesus and it's not working because you've not made him primary. He's being truthful. He's not being extremist. He's not being a cult leader trying to take you away from all your circles of... This is how cult leaders speak sometimes, yeah? They take you away from your circle of protection and then have their way with you. Jesus isn't doing that. He's just telling you, guys, if you don't make me primary, this thing for following me won't work. And he leaves that choice and that truth up to you. So I don't know how many of us have seen this thing on Instagram about trauma. Yeah? And you have these cups and they're all labeled like, oh, your grandparents, your parents, you and your kids, you know? And so this cup of coffee is trauma. Now, coffee is not usually trauma. You can't say that at renewal. So just flow with me. But it's usually something like this. Like, you know, my grandparents had trauma and then they passed it on to my parents and then they got some of their own, you know? And then they passed it on to me. And then I was born a millennial. And now it ends with me because I won't pass it on to my kids. It's beautiful, but I'm about to tear it down. Because I think sometimes the assumption with this thing is that your parents weren't trying to keep you from trauma. If you notice, your parents and your grandparents still have a bit of trauma left. I know that's not the story for all of them, but I know for some of you who they really tried, yeah, that's the trauma. They didn't pass on everything. And if they were really trying and they passed on something to you, what makes you think that you won't pass on anything to your kids just by really trying? You see, it feeds into this thing that we can save ourselves. If we could, Jesus wouldn't have died. So here's what Jesus invites us to do. And you've seen this. If those of you find this cheesy, this is another cheesy thing that used to go on Instagram. Okay? And Jesus tells you, don't focus on trauma or not passing it on. Don't focus on what you received. How about you focus on me? Spring of living water. Stick with me. Focus. Sometimes you move, you miss the flow, come back. Keep going. Yeah? All of a sudden, oh wow, that coffee is not as dark as it used to be. And the coffee keeps going. You keep focusing on Jesus. Keep making him primary. Do all the things. Sometimes God breaks your heart. You move away, come back. He does. He doesn't promise to explain everything that will happen. He promises trouble. But all of a sudden, your cup doesn't have trauma or as much as it had in the beginning. And because you will definitely pass this on to your kids, it's not as dark as what you received. Guys, I think this is self-explanatory, but just in case, there is nothing wrong with loving any of the groups of people you've talked about. There is nothing wrong with companionship. There is nothing wrong with sex. But if God is not primary over all these things, then it's all wrong. And it all goes wrong, despite our best intentions. And so today I'm inviting you to say, instead of let it end with me, let it end with God. Let it end with God. Let it end with God.